Hello! Welcome to Why Not Both, the podcast all about how our multiple passions and interests shape our identity and our lives. My name is Pam Schaefer, and I am a musician and therapist in Los Angeles, and I also happen to be your host. This podcast is produced by Laura Studeris, and for this season, we've partnered up with Under the Radar magazine. If you like what you hear, you can hang out with us on social media. We are on Twitter and Instagram at WNB the podcast. And if you really, really like what you hear, please support us on Patreon. We are under Why Not Both podcast. When you join our Patreon, you get a whole bunch of really cool behind the scenes stuff and you get to chat with us. And that's pretty awesome. Thank you so much for your support, and I hope you enjoy our interviews. For this week's episode, we are joined by the insightful and talented writer, Laurie Penny, otherwise known as my pandemic podmate. I hope that you enjoy our interview. So, Laurie, welcome to Why Not Both?
Hi, Pam.
Hi, Laurie. Welcome to the strange playground that is my podcast.
I'm so excited to finally be on the podcast.
You've only watched me edit it for hours on end.
Yeah.
Thrilling, really.
and now I don't know what to say.
Exactly. Such as
Sorry.
You're like, that's it. That's the whole podcast. That was it. Go home.
I'm Laurie. I do stuff.
I mean, you were around for like the very start of the podcast where I used to be like, hey, what are the multiple things that you do and how do they inform your identity? And now it's more like, so the last year was weird.
Last year was very, very weird. And it was an honor to be your podmate, and I miss you.
Oh, I miss you too. That was, for listeners, Laurie was my podmate where for several months, Laurie was one of the only human beings that I saw in person, and it was a sheer delight. Laurie's an amazing cook, by the way.
Oh, thank you for saying so. It's we should tell people how that happened, how the podding happened.
That was I was going to say, do you want to?
All right. So it's I believe it was March the 14th or 15th, 2020. And you were shooting a music video, or you were about to shoot a music video. And me and Nati Vogel, wonderful Nati Vogel, my roommate at the time, were having a bed bug situation, which was really not nice at all. And we were going around to Pam's house to use the shower and to be somewhere that wasn't being bed bug fumigated. And on this day, when Pam is setting up for her video recording and for the shoot she's going to do, the news comes through from Mayor Garcetti saying the lockdown is coming, the lockdown's happening, stay with the people you're in, stay in your homes, safer at home order. And we turned on the news, we all watched it, and we're like, well, I guess we're the people we're in contact with now. I guess this is it. And then we were like, well, I guess we'll do the show right here. So we shot the music video. It was a very odd day. So I've never been a video honey before. We played dress up with your clothes, also clothes, because all my clothes were being bed bug fumigated. Fortunately, we're the same height. I danced and wiggled about in the back of your music video. But I also remember the afternoon before, because we were going to come around to yours, and it was when all the grocery stores were just being cleared out. It was the pre-apocalypse, and you needed a pomegranate. Yeah, you needed a pomegranate for your video. And I just remember going round the Alberts in Los Feliz, being like, we need a pomegranate for Pam. It was like a journey through the underworld. We didn't find a pomegranate. Because there was no fruit at all.
No food. You sent me photos and it was so surreal. And I love that, by the way, we also had our invisible housemate of no one, but now housemate of all of us. Our friend Sam was with us through this journey because he was helping with the fumigation. So he accidentally jumped into
That's how it became the four of us. It was lovely. It was brilliant.
It really, we balanced each other in the strangest.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like apocalypse summer camp.
It was brilliant. And then we were in the paper as being put. Remember back when being a pod was a thing that was new?
Yes.
And we got interviewed for the LA Times about being in a pod.
I'm so glad that you are part of one of my favorite memories, which was that I finally made the front page of my hometown newspaper, the LA Times, for having friends.
Having friends. Newsflash, people have friends.
Like, that will forever be one of my favorite things that happened. That it's like, well, growing up in LA, you always want to be like, oh, well, I want to be in the Times. It's like, it's like being on KCRW.
Oh, yes,
like,
of course.
Yeah, and that I made the front page of the LA Times, and it was like,
I can't believe we were on the front page, and we looked like sort of, like we're bunkering down in some kind of nuclear. There's this picture of us all looking through the window like little lost orphans. Everyone doing their best sort of semi-pout.
And we're like, what facial expression do you have for you're now trapped in like the Gilligan's Island of Silver Lake during the pandemic? Like,
it was amazing. But I think, and you're talking about like, that's why I've seen you edit this podcast so much, but also it's been wonderful, particularly like being in such close contact in those intense circumstances with you and Nati, and you're both recording artists, because I've lived with and worked with a lot of creative people, but before coming to LA and knowing you guys, I just didn't understand what goes into being a musician in that way. And it was fascinating watching it. I just assume you turn on the microphone, you play the instruments, you go home. Apparently not. Apparently there's a bit more to it than that.
You miss the swearing at your gear, rolling around on the floor, drinking LaCroix, singing in the bathtub portions of. Yeah.
Also, wow, living with Nati when he was making and composing an album, living with somebody who is composing music is very different from. You imagine, you live with a pianist. It's going to be constant concerts, say it 10 times fast. But no, living with somebody who is composing or practicing is the same line of music again and again and again and again and again and again and again for hours.
It's kind of like a Philip Glass composition, but like, not.
And this is happening while we're sharing one auditory space. and can't leave, and I have deadlines, so now I have excellent noise cancelling headphones.
I now have those headphones because of your recommendation for like very similar reason, because it was so fascinating knowing that like you had come to Los Angeles to be like, I'm going to write in TV, and then it was like, surprise, you are going to write in TV, but now for a side quest.
Pandemic times.
The way that we met was just very silly, though, now that I think about it. Yeah, I yelled internet at you.
And I was like, yes, internet friend. And we were actually at a party, which was an interesting party, where it was my ideal. It was a quiet reading party. You go and you read quietly with other people. But I think that's exactly the kind of party where you're not supposed to literally yell internet across the room. I think that's the point of having that party, is nobody yells internet.
Which, hilariously, I mean, that is my favorite genre of party, and I ruined it for myself / made it the best ever because now we're friends.
I know, it was great. And that was the second or third week I was in Los Angeles professionally, although I'd come across to visit a friend before. Yes. And I had just started working on the Nevers, which was mental, because really I had no idea what a big deal it would be taking on this TV job. I just was entirely burned out on feminist journalism and really wanted to do something different, and this seemed like a cool opportunity to go somewhere else. And literally 3 weeks before, I had no idea what you did in a TV writer's room. Honestly, I still don't, but it was very, very abrupt change, and you just hit the ground running. And it was only really after that I realized, oh, wait, no, this is something I really want to do. This is fantastic. Partly because, in Hollywood, there is a lot of talk about toxic workplaces, and I understand that this is a thing that happens. However, when I came into the writers' room on the Nevers, I had come from feminist journalism, which meant that my idea of what a toxic workplace is was very, very off. Right? I was just really happy that nobody was telling me to die that day, and somebody brought me lunch. This is amazing.
Standard below ground, somewhere in the sewer system.
Standard is in the standard is way. It's not the bar is way below the floor.
Exactly.
And we get to make up stories for a living. This is amazing. And so after that, I was just like, right, I have to make this work. This is fantastic. And I hustled, got a manager, and then I've worked on a couple of shows since, and I'm now doing a lot of development, which is exciting. But it is this is why I've always wanted to do this podcast, because the why not both of it all is an interesting disconnect. I mean, so I'm still doing the journalism and the essays, and I've spent the last 3 years doing this enormous book, which is finally done, and now I'm moving on to the next things. But writing like in-depth theory political journalism versus collaborative story work, where the aim is first and foremost to entertain and create something magical and kind of escapist. There is certainly toggling between the two is the most difficult thing, because it does involve, it's some of the same skills but a very different mindset, and also even just very different line level skills. That you're not just tweaking and tweaking to get the exact best argument line. You have to learn how to set out a scene, which is something I find hard enough in real life, let alone in drama. The question is always like, what do these people want? Why are they in this room talking to each other? What's the purpose? I'm like, I don't know. I never know. Don't ask me. I can tell you what they said. It's just like that people have purpose and motivation. Yes, and it's very opaque. And I wish they'd just say.
Yes. And it's fascinating hearing about, it's almost like the polarity of like the implied in the emotional storytelling and the fantasy versus the meta-analysis of the concrete. And that it's like, yeah, I'm like, that would be such, when you said toggling back and forth, I was like, what was that like? And did either of them start informing the other? Like, did delving into the fantasy world inform what you then saw in kind of like the meta-analysis of our political situations, or like vice versa?
Absolutely. As well as the fact that so much of television in particular is such a cultural touchstone at the moment. I mean, you hear more and more people saying, oh, this is the worst timeline, or, we're in the dark season of this show. People really think, because television, particularly streaming television, and particularly in the last 5 to 10 years, is this sort of unique cultural touchstone. It's the collective medium. It's what you talk about with people you haven't seen for a while, or people you don't know very well. If you're not into sports, which I'm really not, it's what you do on dates. You sit down and watch TV, you scroll through. It's the novel form of the age for several reasons, but I think mainly for that reason. It's and when you're creating television, you're creating culture. You're shifting culture, and it's a responsibility. And I'd known that from the outside, partly because I wrote about TV, and sometimes when a new TV show comes out that is contains certain issues, it's a really good opportunity to talk about those issues in, say, a weekly column that you can't think of what to write about. It's a useful entry point. But I didn't realize until I saw it from the inside how much of an impact you can have. I was working on The Haunting of Bly Manor, which was fantastic. And I had a great time, and I'm really proud of the show. And one of the things we did was we made the main characters queer. We made them lesbians, and which wasn't where we started out, but it just felt it was I was surprised lesbians, and I was like one of the people who was instrumental in that decision, which was taken for various reasons. And I just, saw how it could work differently if we made these lovers women. And then watching it a year later, watching that story come out and watching people's reactions to it and saying like, the portrayal of this, powerful queer relationship in contemporary horror in a way that isn't about the queerness.
Right.
And, watching people react to it and watching people feel seen. It's not that it hadn't occurred to me, it had. It's just that, I'm lucky enough to, be surrounded by a lot of brilliant queer people, and I've always been in queer community, and it just hit me in a whole new way how, my God, there's teenagers watching this who don't have queer community, who don't have a model of like what future relationships could look like, and every time something like this comes on TV, it helps. We got nominated for a GLAAD award. That was amazing.
Hey.
I know, it's and just that, and also with the Nevers. In my first, 3 weeks there, when I just didn't really know what a staff writer, which is the most junior rung in the writer's room. You basically, what you do is you shut up and be grateful, and you do what you're told. I wasn't informed of this, so there was a lot of me going. We're standing on chairs, figuratively or literally, going, let's talk about the British Empire. Have you heard about what we did, in Africa? Have you heard about Ireland? And people are like, no, we haven't read deeply into the history of the British Empire because we're professional TV writers. So we've spent the last 10 years building careers in television. Who is this mad woman? What
on earth is this person talking about, and why?
Yeah. It's but it's really it's really, and it's useful to being around TV writers and around creative people, and fiction and prose writers, but TV work is uniquely collaborative. And so I met playwrights. You always have to have a playwright, I think, in every writer's room, because they know about scene structure, which is just wizardry to me. But when people talk about the process of putting together fictional worlds, it impacted my journalism in a way I didn't expect to. And I actually, in the middle of I wrote a piece during my first few weeks in the Nevers room, which I'm still, I think it's one of the best pieces I've ever done. And it's still actually, we talked about it when we met because it had come out. It was the piece about going on the crypto cruise.
Oh my God.
And
yes.
Yeah, it was, and I was thinking about how to apply, scene structure and TV writer principles to that piece. And I think that's one of the reasons it did so well, is because I was like, right, how do we cross-pollinate this? It was I'm like, also being in LA and being in America, you're allowed to say things like, gosh, I'm very proud of this piece, didn't it do well? Whereas in Britain, they're like, oh, are you proud of it, are you? I think it was good, do you? Yeah, I've written a lot of things that are not good. It's what you have to do.
Right. And two questions sprung to mind. One, the cultural difference between Los Angeles culture specifically and then British culture in that way. And also, how was it, I guess, how did it feel to impact culture via TV, via storytelling, as opposed to through journalism? Because through your journalism, you do impact queer culture, but this was like, now you're part of what you're usually analyzing.
Yes.
And I was like, what was that identity kind of shift like?
I mean, I love it. And I love it because of the collaborative aspect. And one of the things that's true as a TV writer is that I think this is mainly a Hollywood thing, but in Hollywood, which is kind of like fairyland coming from the outside. You're from LA, but Hollywood, it's like, the weather never changes. It's always kind of a perfect sunny day. Nobody ages. Everybody smiles all the time, but you have to kind of really pay attention to the words people are saying. But one of the things is you are not allowed to talk about what's going on the show, and you're definitely never allowed to say anything negative, which as a British person is quite offensive. but it's odd being literally forbidden from critique. Or to say here's what the problems were, you can't even mention that there were problems because it's very, it's Hollywood. Everything has a smile. And that is, I think in some ways that's I mean, I guess they have to put guardrails up partly because they're probably worried that otherwise people would just tear each other apart. And I think the longer you go in, it's like in a family where nobody ever says anything negative ever. Then the first time somebody does, all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, people are like, yes, and now the deluge.
Yes, but it was actually, coming from work where my job is to shout about everything all the time. It was quite interesting to be, in a situation where you are forced to see the positive of everything, and you're forced to just be a hype person, and just be. Honestly, I consider any TV project I'm working on, and fingers crossed I get to keep doing it. Like, my job is to be first fangirl in the way that, you can be the first follower in a religion. Because because my writing, the first way I really started doing journalism and doing writing was through fandom. It was through LiveJournal back in the day. And I started out as a blogger. I didn't actually write. Well, I did write fan fiction, but most of it is on paper. Thank God.
I was just like, where's that paper, Laurie?
I know, it's somewhere in my mum's old house, like some Spike Buffy, like really, it was really cringe, 13-year-old Laurie writes some very, very obvious Marty Stews and Mary Suits. It's like, oh, you're a vampire assassin, are you? Amazing. Also a witch. Mysterious.
That's right. Everyone gets their start in a way, though, isn't it? Like, if you didn't write something cringe when you were 13, were you really living?
Absolutely. Exactly. It's a surprising number of TV writers turn out to have been fanfic writers back in the day. Like, it's great because it's collaborative as well, and it's incredibly the fact that it's low stakes means people are very free to be creative. And honestly, that's one of the things I miss certainly about early days of blogging, which, I started writing regularly on my LiveJournal, and I was like, I'll make this a professional, semi-professional blog on blogspot.com in 2008.
Very professional.
And professional means people who aren't my LJ friends might see it.
Oh, man.
But yeah, it came out of that fan culture. Thing about TV, well, particularly Hollywood TV writing, and I'm not sure how, I think this is possibly the case for music as well, but you can tell me if I'm right or wrong on this. Mm-hmm. The stakes involved are so high, partly because the salaries people get paid and the money involved is so crazy. Like, the higher the stakes are in any creative enterprise, the harder it is to be free about things, to take risks. Particularly, there are a lot of people involved because everybody's going to be worried about something different. Everybody's going to have their own idea on how to make this a success in the best way. And you can end up sometimes with the raw edges rubbed off. And certainly, I've been blocked over the last year not from writing, but from publishing in nonfiction, just because I'm like, the stakes are so high. Now I've got this following, and people troll me and harass me. Everything has to be right. Everything has to be perfect. I can't just put out whatever. Whereas back in the day when I was putting out whatever, it was a lot more supple, a lot more fluid. And I think, and one of the joys about TV writing is because it's not just you by yourself. There is more freedom. There's more freedom. You can be more supple, especially in like the development and idea development stage, because it's not. I don't know. I'm sure you've found this, but there's a real benefit to being able to take time to work on things that either aren't immediately coming out, or there isn't that pressure of publication.
Yes.
And with writing in particular, because now anybody can click publish. There is a benefit to doing creative work that is not destined for publication in any way.
Yes. What you spoke to of the expectations, and especially like you said, that people, have trolled you and harassed you and things like that. Yeah. Like, there is part of, like, in any creative industry, like, the whole thing that they joke about in music, like the sophomore slump, where it's like, if you...
I don't know about that.
Oh, It's basically like, say, you release something that's like really successful, whether it's your debut album or just perceived as your debut. Because another funny thing is that sometimes people perceive your first successful work as your debut, even if
it might not be your
work
first
for like 15 years.
Right.
So like, there's totally that. And then like whatever you release next, like people call it the sophomore slump, because generally whatever you release right after something very successful tends to not be as successful. And the reason why is that like people already have this expectation of you, and no one can live up to an expectation like that. Particularly Absolutely. As an artist, you're making things not because of other people's expectations, but because it's something that you feel drawn to create or write about. And so it goes directly against usually why the thing you made was successful in the first place. And so I like what you're saying, that it's like, there's some things that you have to create that are completely outside of those expectations. And when you're collaborating with other people, in some ways that bypasses those expectations because it's a different permutation. So people aren't like, yes, it is Laurie Penny, the writer of the crypto article. It's just like,
yes,
it's
exactly.
Laurie Penny. Who's that?
Exactly. And I mean, honestly, that was incredibly freeing about Hollywood as well, because it is amazing how people do not care what kind of public profile you have if you're not on the television, like on the television rather than writing for it. Like, it's like people do not give a damn if you write about politics. And it was great. It was great. A bit odd because people maybe care about politics, but people within, like, I think it's just another one of those things like, oh, we don't get political within television. We don't, but people aren't constantly hooked up to the to the adrenaline of the news and the way you have to be if you're working in that kind of industry. And it was it's really interesting to just go into a room and spend all day talking about made up things while the world is falling apart outside.
That's also I wanted to ask you about that like, particularly as you were writing a book about how everything basically needs to be thrown in the garbage and reformed. Like, to speak in very woo-woo California terms, I'm like, it's the tower card where it's like, and now everything falls down and everyone goes, oh no. But then the star comes after. That's the thing, is the star is the next in the deck, which is like everything is like reborn and wonderful. It's sort of like Dark Ages Renaissance kind of vibe.
I love the star. The star was always my favorite card. When it comes up in the deck, that's always me. But I love tarot. I love playing with tarot.
Me too. I love symbolic language.
Exactly. That's what storytelling is. Yes. Although it's wonderful watching some people realize that reading tarot is a really good way to be able to tell all their friends exactly what they think of them. And I love that. A couple of people I know have discovered that recently, and it is amazing to watch. It is just that you can just sit down and read someone and tell them exactly what you think they should do with their lives, and they can't interrupt because it's the cut. It's amazing. I'm putting it in a scene sometime.
I would love that, because I know exactly who and what an exact situation you are speaking of right now, and so that's really funny to me.
Yes, it's amazing. And a lot of wise people who I probably should have listened to when I, went off to do screenwriting the first time, told me, really, you should set this book aside, because it's a totally different muscles you're working, and you're clearly, deep in the weeds with it, and why not just cut your losses, call it. And I didn't, because I'm stubborn and I don't like being told what to do, particularly when I know I'm right. I've got a bit better at this since, but I did not believe in the sunk cost fallacy. And but over the course of the last year and a half, I have written this, 110,000 word book, which has been redone as a thought exercise. Pretty sure it's quite good. I can't tell, because you know how you are when you how everyone is when you get so close to a project. I have no idea.
When you're that deep in a project, you have no clue.
Absolutely. Maybe I'll read it in a year or so and be like, that's all right as an observation.
You're like, it's really on something.
Yeah, I was onto something there. It's but just the breadth and depth of reading I have had to do for that project, and for the for the essays I've done over the past couple of years have I think they make it's an unusual background of thought to bring to screenwriting, which I'm also doing, because my disadvantage in screenwriting is that I'd never been to film school, although I've taken myself through a lot of different amateur film school things since. I had no idea how you sit down and structure a story on screen from start to finish. Mm-hmm. What I did have was, a surprising amount of knowledge about the history of sanitation in the Victorian era, and a surprising amount of knowledge about different forms of journalism through the ages. And, I've gone and, been like embedded with young fascist movements, and to see how the dynamics of activism work on the far right. And let's talk about the history of left-wing activism in the 70s, and to the extent that a showrunner of mine once described me as a human Pinterest board, which is actually quite useful. Particularly in a place like LA.
You're very much like, especially, I love the way you just said that you're a human Pinterest board. I love that pretty much you're like, here's a collection of special interests. Which of them would you like to choose? I have a whole catalog.
Let me pull up the files and think about it. Because
especially the way you spoke of researching, like that makes total sense. Yes. But yeah.
The absolute joy of the work I get to do, both kinds of work I get to do, and particularly because I've been lucky enough for the past many years to, be mostly single, and to not have a lot of dependence and not have a lot of responsibilities that aren't my work. And I'm very aware of that. But it means more and more my job is to think real hard about things and go on exciting brain journeys. And I love it. It is a joy of my life right now. And it is such a privilege. And I think, particularly when I'm researching gender stuff and understanding the history of it, how many bloody people who were assigned female would have got the chance to do work like this. That means you can just go and do self-directed study and research in all kinds of different fields. And that's your job. You're allowed to. Your job. It is such a pleasure. And I hope I get to continue doing it for ages, and I hope it comes out eventually in the work, particularly over pandemic, when our pod rearranged itself. I was living by myself for more or less 4 months of not, seeing people very occasionally, but it was mostly, in the house time, pandemic raging outside time, and I spent that largely tidying the house, listening to lots and lots and lots of informative history podcasts. Mm-hmm. And I've only just noticed that, again, now I apparently know a lot of stuff about stuff, which is...
Well, and you said something that I loved, that you said that you were like, and I didn't put that book down because I was in fact very stubborn. Which I was like, one, I appreciate that. But also that like you did in a way, it's strange because I don't think balance is necessarily the right word. I might juggle, where it's like there was something that was captivating about that book, even if it was in some ways burdensome because you were like, oh God, I haven't finished the book. There was something that captivated you about that book, even as it like grew and grew and grew. And I like that you stuck with that story, that you didn't give up on that story, even when you were telling other stories, that you were like, no, there's something I have here.
It felt, things in it feel, the title is Sexual Revolution, and it felt like something I had to say and finish saying and work on. And now that it's out there, I don't know what your metric is for, have I made a success of a particular piece of music, a particular piece of writing? But for me, particularly with a book, because the amount of, unless you're a giant best-selling writer, the amount of impact you have with a particular book versus the work you put in is on a completely different level than say the work you put in on an essay. If I write an essay that's 3,000 words, it's incredibly shareable. It will reach a lot of people. But with a book, it's different. A book is more of a slow burn. And my metric for has this book been worth it is at least one or two people email me saying it's been really useful to them.
Yes,
it's you know, this has changed my life. It's depth of impact rather than reach of impact. But yeah, also, you know, the cultural difference you were talking about is you know, California, I think, is really good for British people because it forces us to get over ourselves. It forces, and it's not just California. I think it's America in general. I remember, I first came to New York when I was 25. I came to report on Occupy. And then like there was a boy and I stayed and there wasn't a boy and then there was New York and New York's amazing. I was 25. It was a really amazing time, actually, almost 10 years ago now. The heady 2011 12 days. But I was staying above a theatre in Bushwick.
Oh, wow.
I was living above it. It was a small theatre called the Bushwick Star. And I remember some of the plays that were on there were just, I mean, confusingly dire. And there was one, they had like this showcase week where, you know, there were like 20-minute plays. And one of them, and I remember this vividly because, as mentioned, I lived upstairs.
Yes.
One of the plays was just screaming. It was literally just a woman screaming on stage for 20 minutes. And it really hit me. Because the difference between New York, and I was in journalism world at that point, but overlap journalism literary world, is that like in Britain, you'd never put that on. You'd have that idea to do your screaming play, but even at the Edinburgh Festival, that at Fringe, you know, you'd be like, oh no, I won't do that. That's too silly. And the thing I realized about Americans is that like, Americans don't have that same reticence, and they're not as afraid to be laughed at. Right. Because the thing is, if you're going to actually create good art, you have to have a culture where it's okay to put on your very silly screaming play. Because for every so like in this showcase, that for every 5 or 10 of these completely ridiculous things, one will be fantastic. It will be amazing. And you don't get that one in the same way unless you have the space for all the others. You have to have, just the UK, there's a lot of tall poppy syndrome, and you have to, earnestness is suspect. Ask me how I know this as a very wholesome person. It's possibly.
I encountered this as I've gotten to know I was just like, as I've gotten to know British people. But I don't think I ever told you that when I met my ex, who I just spoke to last night and had a really funny conversation with. But when I met him, I thought I was being nice. Like, he went to sit down next to me on a beanbag chair. We were watching movies at a friend's house. And I was like, oh, do you have enough room? And he was like, what? And I was like, do you have enough room? Do you want me to move over? And he's like, oh, do you want me to move over? And I was like, well, I meant like, how do you want me to sit?
No, that means move.
Yeah, it literally, I was just like, I was trying to be like, are you comfortable? Like, I don't know you that well, so I don't like be up in your space. And the more I was trying to be nice, like the weirder the interaction. Amazing. He thought I was mocking him later when we talked about it. I was like, what is wrong with you? And he's like, I thought you were just making fun of me, being like, oh, which you want rubbing up against me, like your tits or your ass. And I was just like, excuse me? And I was like, no, I was trying to give you like your personal space by asking where you wanted to sit.
Yeah, and I love that upfrontness. Oh my God. I love American upfrontness. It's okay to sit, because I'm like, I have certain spectrumy tendencies, not diagnosed yet, but job for when I get home, but like social rules it's really refreshing when people, particularly New Yorkers are the best for this. They just say if they've got an issue and you're standing in the way. New Yorkers will tell you. Californians won't tell you in the same way. But like, even I know how to speak British passive aggressive. I have my best friend is married to an American, and I often have to translate because, oh my God, because the thing is like, she will say something like, oh, would you mind unstacking the dishwasher when you get a moment? And I understand that what she means is do it now. And I will be upset. I will be upset if within the next hour it is not done. And what he hears, because he's Californian, is, oh, if I have time and I feel like it, I'll get to that. But if not, no. And I'm like, no, this is the two cultures divided by a single language mode.
At that exact conversation, the troubleshoot for that is inquiring, when might you unload the dishwasher? Just so I know.
Amazing.
And that's, it's the compromise, because it gets across the idea that you are already assuming that they're going to unload the dishwasher, but you have to specify the time so that they go, oh, you're assuming I'm going to do this. Okay, now I got to pick a time.
That's wicked. It's but like the counter to that is, I would consider, like, I would find it really hard to say something like, can you unload the dishwasher? Because to me, that's rude.
Right.
That's rude. And my friend would she would find it hard to just say that because it's rude. You don't say that. But speaking of being British in America as well, it is, it's great. If you're a bit of a weird person, I keep saying, like, honestly, to friends of mine who are odd or socially strange, I'm like, go to America. They'll just think you're British. You can get away with being a lot weirder over here. Because people don't notice. People just think that's how all British people are. And it's a lie. It's not true.
Oh, and we let so much slide due to the accent.
Yep. Like, I know, especially for boys.
Alone. Oh, totally. You could be saying whatever nonsense and people would be like, oh, wow.
You sound so clever. I know. It's shameful because it doesn't work the other way. Although I think Americans do get a pass. They get a pass for kind of different sorts of behavior, but it's in a sneering way. It's like, oh, well, they can't help doing this. They're Americans.
They're American.
They're essentially savage. They're
just like Labradors or something. They're just,
exactly. They can't help it. They're impaired. Like they have
impaired by enthusiasm.
Exactly, yeah. And it's just because, honestly, like Americans have that. Americans are allowed to be that earnest if they come to the UK because you're foreign, so you're allowed. Actually, that's what. Yeah, go on. And that's what we all really want to do. Like it's like British people, and maybe some other Europeans too. Like it's. When British people understand that we are allowed to be earnest and serious, really good work is created. And it's exactly the same, the opposite way around. When Americans get permission to be silly, Americans find it very hard to be silly and to take the piss out of themselves and other people. But when they finally, like the very best comedy, the best American comedy is, and I still think there's not a lot of good American comedy, but the American comedy that's fantastic is where people have worked out that they're allowed to be silly and then suddenly they're so good at it.
Yes.
Like, and that you're allowed to play, you're allowed to not take everything so seriously all the time. It's and then it becomes, that permission to not take things seriously it's important both ways around. Both in what you're creating and how you're creating it. I appreciate, like in college and university, I was in a panto society, if you know what that is. Well, any British listeners will know.
I was going to say, explain to the American, because I kid you not, the first time you ever said that to me, I was just like, is that when you mime emotions? Is that when you sing about them? Do you recite poetry?
Oh my God. And hereby hangs a tale. So panto is a particularly British phenomenon. It's a play / musical, and they've been going, it's Victorian, started in the Victorian age, and you go, traditionally it's over the Christmas time, and it's a family show, and it's long actually, they last like 2-3 hours, and it's normally a fairy tale or something. It's Jack and the Beanstalk or Aladdin, and traditionally it's got lots of people in drag. But it's not the same as drag. It's very obvious that it's a man in a dress rather than a man in drag or a transgender or a transsexual person. It's a very specific panto thing. It's very, very high. It's very high camp. There are elements of vaudeville, and the acting is not meant to be good, right? It's burlesque. It's vaudeville. There are lots and lots of puns, lots and lots of dirty jokes, lots of songs, which are often, if you go along, they'll do like their own version of whatever is top of the pops that week. And in university, there was a panto society. People who like panto tend to like musicals as well. There's a similar sort of earnestness.
Yes.
But I was in the panto society. I actually ran the panto society for a year at university, and I still hang out with those people. And it is, I kid you not, I think it's been one of the best things for my creative life since then, because it wasn't a professional panto society. We went around and performed in schools and old people's homes, and it was permission to suck at something and to have the most fun you could. Like we were doing Jack and the Beanstalk. I was Jack, and pantomime heroes slap their thighs like, "Hello, boys and girls." If you've ever heard somebody go, "He's behind you," or "Oh, no, they're not. Oh, yes, he is," you're drawing a blank, but that's panto callbacks. It's a bit like, the Rocky Horror Show has elements of,
gotcha.
That has a big feeling of panto, although obviously it's I also directed the Rocky Horror Show when I was a kiddie. But there's a big
so much sense. This is making so much of you makes so much sense, and it's amazing.
There's a big overlap in sensibility. If Rocky Horror is like, it's basically an adult panto, is what it is. But I'm quite a good performer in terms of like, if I've got an audience of children, I can be excited and excitable. I'm a terrible actor, really not good at all. But that didn't matter. That didn't matter. We were doing Jack and the Beanstalk, and we were meant to have a cow costume. Okay. But the girl who was meant to make the cow costume, I'm not sure how this happened, but decided that she didn't want to make a cow. Instead, she wanted to make a polar bear.
Pardon?
A polar bear. So we're just like, right, we'll go with it. So, Jack was taking his polar bear to sell at market.
Okay.
And we had that polar bear costume for years, and we appeared in every panto for some reason. It was quite hot in the bear, but we were insisting it was a cow. The cow was just sick, so that's why it looked exactly like a polar bear. Well, I think she had a lot of white fabric.
I'm flashing back to when you said, that each character has these motivations for coming into the scene and what they want, yes, and why they're saying things. And I'm like, no wonder in some ways this is so mystifying that I'm like, this sounds like what you're describing is the ultimate spin cycle of what someone's motivations are. It's like the Escher painting of motivations.
Absolutely. This was the society where the rule for the society was, if you turned up and you wanted to be in the panto, you got a part. And if there wasn't one for you, we'd write you one. And we had a couple of people who were genuinely very talented and amazing singers, but they weren't always the lead because it had to be someone else's turn, you see. Mm-hmm. It was very fair. But a lot of the people were, people from working class or middle class backgrounds who, had spent their entire lives really, really working very hard to get to these elite universities. A lot of scientists, a lot of lawyers, doctors, mathematicians, and people who could really do with some silly, silly fun. Lots of doctors, actually. And it was fascinating watching. And it's been fascinating. A lot of people are now working, really quite surprisingly high-powered jobs in science and policy and other things. Not everyone, obviously, but right. It's been wonderful watching how that has impacted everything. Because honestly, you just have to. We did also take some pantos up to the Edinburgh Festival. One of which was we did The Matrix, the pantomime, which was brilliant. It was fantastic. We had a budget of about £50.
Oh my god!
And that's because that's the point of panto. It's meant to be a bit crap, right? For the bit where Neo, who was obviously played by a girl, was was floating through the air. We just had her get on a skateboard, and somebody wearing black just sort of slowly pushed it along the stage. Yeah. Back to the Future, the pantomime. We wanted to do Dune, the pantomime. I was like working on a Dune, so with a pantomime worm, I envisaged all this. And I was and the spice of life, and the spice must flow. Mother Superior as Panto Dame. Put your hand in my box, kind of thing. Quite niche.
I was going to say, I'm like, I love the direction that this went, because I was thinking about what you were saying about how, in a way, there's this silliness that's lacking in American comedy, but also initially what we were talking about, even about like, feminist journalism, that it's this world in which we're being threatened on a regular basis. Yes. And it's like, how do you inject like the lightheartedness? Because the thing is, you can't write something that's, I was thinking about this also in terms of like climate change and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
Where if you write something that's just like, hello, everything is terrible, but with no like, here's some hope of what can change, or here's some other ways we can frame things, or here's where we can go from here. All you're going to do is like, make people spiral even more, which we certainly all are already.
Exactly. And I know you're exactly right. And well, there are a lot of horrible things happening in the world, and you have to be able to talk about them without freaking people out.
Yes.
But also, doom is also inherently ridiculous, right? And people forget this. And fascists are ridiculous, and misogynists and racists are ridiculous. And one of the things that disturbs me the most at the moment about political culture and political writing and being involved in all that is how hard it is to laugh at the people in charge anymore,
right?
Particularly in Britain, which is odd. Like there's this new really censorious streak where we cannot laugh at ourselves anymore, and that's what worries me about Britain going home soon. Because we're literally in a sausage war with Ireland, in a sausage war with all chilled meats, but sausages being transported across the Irish Sea. And I was listening to the British radio the other day, and this was one of the top stories. And the people reading the news had to say sausage war about 20 times, and nobody was laughing about the sausage war.
Yeah, that's I'm having, every time you say sausage war, I'm like,
sausage war. We're at war. We're going for a sausage trade war. It's like literally, it's not a sausage party. That's over. Like, is nobody joking about this? It's like, no, the sausage war is very serious. It's a Brexit trade. It's like, are you fucking kidding me?
Sausage war.
Sausage war. For God's sake. And apparently this is all serious, and we are meant to have self-deprecating humor. We're meant to be allowed to laugh at ourselves. It's we're not America, and it is really, and the fact that you can't, like, it's a problem in left-wing writing and journalism as well, because people seem to still think that if you point out how ridiculous the other side is, or if you make jokes at all, then you're not taking politics seriously. Politics is far too important to take seriously all the time. I was like one of the only people to write about the terrible racist pirates. Did I tell you about this? Oh my God. Like, I'll send you the piece that I wrote about this a while ago. I was rereading it the other day. So what happened? This was in 2017. Where there were a lot of migrants trying to cross the Mediterranean, and there was a big, huge scaremongering in Europe about the migrant threat to the European way of life. Neo-fascist, neo-Nazi groups, and neo-Nazi adjacent alt-right groups of young people were sort of getting together, with some people coming across from America saying, "We will stop this. We'll stop the Islamification of Europe." Was one of the things that they're just. I mean, you know what I mean. Like, you don't have to explain. You know what they're going to say already. But so some of these people, this gang of people called Generation Europa or something, They all sound like, odd websites, but porn sites. But like, they decided that what they were going to do to prevent the migrants surging across the sea was they were going to charter a boat to stop this. They were going to basically become pirates, and something turn them, which is, you don't turn people back in the middle of the sea. Also, you can't fight. It was not thought through, right? So they charter a boat, I think in Turkey, and they went across the Mediterranean Sea. And the idea was, it was a publicist. Katie Hopkins was on this boat. And well, firstly, they realized that none of them, they're not sailors. They're not, you're not a pirate, Graham. So they had to charter a boat with a crew. And then they had no idea what they were going to do when they got out there. And rapidly, they got lost. At which point it became very clear that none of them was an experienced sea person, and they had no idea, and they became stranded. And the same people who had been rescuing migrants from the Mediterranean, the German search and rescue teams, had to divert in order to save the Nazis. In order to, and oh my god, the press release that this German boat put out was amazing. It was so German. It's like, we are here to offer assistance to any vessel and anybody who may be in need in the sea in these dangerous times. And then not just this, the shitty, fake Hitler Youth, awful pirates. So they finally get this boat back to Greece. At which point, I shit you not, 20 members of the, I think, Sri Lankan crew got off in Greece and claimed asylum. So the net effect of that trip was to increase the number of migrants. It's like, this is exactly what we didn't want to happen.
I love how that worked out. Just that's chef's kiss. That just worked out so
perfect. It's
beautiful.
Perfect. And but a lot of people, were like, oh well, we can't write about this because it's just too silly. It's like, are you kidding? We have to talk about how silly these people are, because they're still dangerous. Because they're silly doesn't make them not dangerous. But I think laughing in the face of doom and fascism is incredibly important, and not being allowed to, even if there's a chilling effect and you're not allowed to as much as before, I think it is incredibly important, because you're in an authoritarian setting when taking the piss is not allowed, and pointing out how absolutely bloody ridiculous people are being is not allowed. And that seems, certainly there is a chilling effect in British culture at the moment where that is less and less. The BBC is much more wary about lampooning the government. It never used to be. I mean, all through the Blair years, they were taking the piss out of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown every day. And there wasn't, these people, the new breed of authoritarian does not like to be laughed at, doesn't even like to be described. So that, I think, is the challenge of the next few years.
I loved what you said, that essentially, if we can't laugh about something, we can't actually do anything about it, because we just sit there feeling miserable. And so no matter what story you're telling, if you're not engaging people in some way, through pathos or through laughter, what are you doing?
Absolutely. Or camp, high drama, give the people what they want. A little bit of it.
Just a little. More.
Just a little. All right. I love you. You need to go.
Oh, I love you too.
Tell me if you go out to the thing. I love you much.
Thank you so much for being so generous with your time.
Thank you so much for making time. This has been an absolute joy.
Oh. Thank you again for listening to this episode of Why Not Both. If you liked what you heard, please make sure to like us and subscribe to us on your preferred podcast platform. You can also come hang out with us on social media. We are at WNB the podcast, both on Instagram and on Twitter. This season, we are brought to you by Under the Radar magazine. Under the Radar is a nationally distributed print, music, and entertainment magazine and website. You can find them at www.undertheradarmag.com, and feel free to support them on Patreon. Extra special thanks to our producer, Laura Studeris, who is literally a rock star. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you next episode.